Everybody. My name is Mike Dowdy. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for the Northeastern Regional Information Center at the Capital Region BOCES in Albany. And I'm here with Monica. Monica, would you like to introduce yourself to folks?
Sure, Mike. Hi, I'm Monica Statiel, and I work at NARIC, and I'm the manager of data privacy and security.
Great. So we're here today to talk about EdLaw 2D. And in our current circumstance, with everybody working from home, EdLaw 2D and student data privacy and security is on top of everyone's mind. So we'd like to take you through some basic information about the law and what you need to do in your role.
Exactly, Mike. I feel like every day we're just getting inundated with a lot of questions from people who haven't really looked at EdLaw 2D yet. You know, it's been out there, and our administrators, our tech directors, they're pretty well versed in it, wouldn't you say?
I think they've had lots of conversations around it, and since compliance with EdLaw 2D deals with contracts, a lot of that happens at the district office. But there are things that everybody in the district or BOCES can do around student data privacy and security. We're going to talk about some of those things today. So, kind of the Cliff Notes version, if you would, right, Monica?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, let's just give a quick little history. EdLaw 2D was enacted in 2014. But they didn't really do a whole lot with it. They said, you have to get a DPO and you have to write some regulations. And it's taken like the last 5 years to get all of that done.
Hang on, let's make
So
sure. Does everybody know what a DPO is?
I'm sorry, you're right. I'm so used to saying acronyms. A data protection officer. So we had one assigned at the state. And now at each district, there's a data protection officer as well. So if you hear me say DPO, that's data protection officer.
In the state. So what ends up happening is, like Monica said, the law gets passed, and then the state education department has to create regulations around that. So you might hear Part 121, and that's the commissioner's regulations that were put in place to basically enforce EdLaw 2D.
Was, I think, 25 pages long, these regulations. But what they were able to do, and I really like this, is they broke up those regulations and they called them like 9 categories, so to speak, but they're really just segments of how to adopt the law. So we're going to talk about each one of them very, very briefly, because some of them are going to, it'll involve your school, but not necessarily those that are in the classroom. And some will involve you a lot. So we'll just give a general overview of what needs to be done. The first one is protection of PII. Well, that sounds pretty simple, right? We just got to protect the PII. But there's regulations that really identify what protecting the PII is.
When you say PII, you mean?
Personally identifiable information. Thank you. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later too, like what exactly is PII, because that's a question that everyone asks as well. What is it? I've heard it's this, I've heard it's that. So we're going to try to get a little bit more clear on what that is. So the first category is really your district just taking the steps, and they've already started that. Like, we as a district want to protect our students' PII, and we're willing to write those steps and make that part of our culture at our school. The second category is Parents' Bill of Rights for data privacy and security. So that kind of takes that first thought of we want to protect our students, and it puts it in writing, and it makes it into a policy. And kind of like 2 policies, really. There's the Parents' Bill of Rights, and that's going to go on to every single contract that is written to your third-party vendors, but also your data security and privacy policy, which is number 4, and I haven't really gotten there yet. But both of those things are talking about how vendors and the district plans on protecting that data that belongs to your students.
Before you go on, I think that's a really important piece of this law and the regulation is that it's the district's responsibility ultimately to make sure anybody they contract with and purchase software or anything through that those vendors comply with the law. So this is
Absolutely.
pretty expansive in terms of its enforcement.
Absolutely. The vendors that you deal with at a district, they need to feel about privacy the same way that your district is stating, and they're stating that with their data security and privacy policy. So what that means is your vendors need to show you their data security and privacy policy. And they're going to do that when you give them your parents' bill of rights. So they kind of work hand in hand together there. Um,
And that's something too, like we mentioned before, that's going to happen in the district office. So when your contracts get negotiated and all that stuff, when that all goes on, that'll happen there. That's not going to be your responsibility if you're
not
not
as a not as a
a
teacher,
teacher. Yeah.
no. But you're going to play a part in it. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Um, okay, so data protection officer or DPO. I think I spoke about that a little bit. Each district has to appoint a person, and they're going to be like the project manager to, make sure that these 9 categories are carried out by the right people. They're going to be your first point of contact if you do ever have a data breach. And they're going to be the ones that deal with people like, say you have an audit from Tom DiNapoli's office. So they're kind of in charge of your data security and privacy. Third-party contracts, and again, Mike just kind of talked about that. There's very specific language that has to go into third-party contracts, and that language says that you have to align your contract with your Parents' Bill of Rights. It also has to align with the NIST cybersecurity framework. Your vendors have to, give you some sort of assurance that they take the necessary security precautions back at their place to protect that data as well. The next category is annual employee training. Now, this is one of the things that does affect you. You're going to notice that you have more and more privacy and security training. Some of that will be compliance training, and it might be in the form of, say, safe schools or that compliance training that you do every September. You have to watch those videos or somebody comes to your school and talks to you. So there's the compliance training, but then they also say throughout the year, you have to reinforce that training, and it's not just about a one and done. It's changing the culture of your district. Um, so the next framework, excuse me, the next category is the NIST cybersecurity framework. So I talked about that a little bit when I was talking about third-party contracts. Your district's security infrastructure needs to align with the NIST cybersecurity framework. And that's not something that's really going to affect you a whole lot. Again, it's going to be your tech director, your DPO. They'll be the ones that'll be working on that for you. Incident reporting and notification. That's your next category. Now, that might or might not affect you. It might affect you because if you do have a student or parent or yourself who feels that maybe their data was breached, you need to be able to have a way to let somebody in your district know. And you need to have that done fast. So, it's a little more of a process and not just, calling up the tech guy and saying, "Hey, I think this just happened to me." You need to have a formal process in place so that you know what to do. And that goes for authorized, unauthorized disclosure complaint procedures as well. The district will be putting a notification out on your website for parents to be able to know what that process is if they feel that their student has had any sort of data breach occur at school as well.
Like Monica said, this is becoming or has become a required training. So you think about the beginning of the school year when you do the bloodborne pathogens, the sexual harassment training, all those things like that, where there's a training that's required, and then also a process by which those laws and regulations get enforced. So your district has a complaint process around Title IX and sexual harassment and things like that. This is another type of reporting process. Basically, it will probably follow a similar structure that's already in existence in your district. I mean, that's the hope, right? That we're not, this isn't creating something completely out of nowhere, that it fits in with what's already in place in the district.
Okay, so why? Why were you protecting student data? Who wants student data? Mike, you want to take a shot at that, or you want me to take a shot at it? We both can, because there's plenty to say.
There's a lot here. You read it, you can see some of these headlines. There's lots of examples out there of data breaches. You hear about them every day. And and student data is valuable to people who are hacking in. I mean, it could be anything from a ransomware attack to a denial of service attack. There's lots of different things going on. And for a while, educational institutions were sort of not getting hit by these attacks. But you've seen recently municipalities like cities, counties, towns, and now school districts have been targets of these kinds of attacks. So it's
You know
really,
why, Mike?
why is
You know
that,
why?
Monica?
So they're getting attacked for a couple of different reasons. I'll say the one that everybody in our viewing audience will certainly resonate with. It's not, they'll understand. Resources. We don't have the resources at our districts to really put in the heavy security that banks and hospitals and such are doing. So they're going after easy targets, and that would be districts. And what are they trying to get? They're trying to get student data. Why? Because student data is not out in the world yet. And if you have a fresh social security number, a fresh ID of a student, you can take that ID and either on its own or maybe just combine it with some other information that you have. And you've created a whole new ID that you can use to, let's see, claim another child on your tax forms. You can open up credit cards. Um, Anything that you would normally do with an ID, you can do that with a child's stolen ID. Because how often do parents really have the ability or the knowledge to go and run a credit check on their 4-year-old or their 6-year-old? It's really not until they're getting up to starting to think about college and maybe applying for loans that they're discovering that maybe somebody has accessed their ID way back in second grade and they have some really poor credit. And now, what do? They have to try to clean it up from 6 years ago. That's a mess.
Scary too. And it's not just that. I mean, if you think about, and now that again, we're working all remotely, importance of how important a network is and being able to use the internet and the tools that you have at your disposal. There have been attacks where the attackers have been able to shut down an organization's network for weeks and they are unable
Oh my
to
gosh.
use all of the tools that they need to do their work. So this is scary.
It is
And
scary. And we don't have time to go into all of the things that you and I experienced this past summer. Just, with our districts in our RICS, and not so much we've been lucky here in Albany. But some of our RICS around the state have not been so lucky. It was a rough summer.
you can see here that this is an interesting statistic, right? In 2017, the New York Post reported that over 1 million children were victims of identity. So back to Monica's point, identity theft. Back to Monica's point, this is scary.
Yeah, one thing I also want to mention, besides the nefarious things that people do with data, there's also the whole idea of privacy in the sense that, we're all getting these, I don't know, the profiles built by the good guys, Target, Amazon, they're building these profiles around us so that makes it easier for us to shop, easier for them to sell. And I admit it works for me. I love being able to just have my phone give me a suggestion on what it is I'm looking for. But you know what the difference is? The difference is I'm an adult and I can make that choice onto whether or not I want Amazon to have my information or Facebook or Instagram or any of those. I can make that choice. What I can't do is I can't make that choice for another child doesn't have that ability to make that choice or to say, no, Target, I don't want you to build a profile around my shopping habits or around the kind of clothes that I like to wear. So that's where it's so important that we as educators, we are there, we're their buffer between the good guys and our students to protect that data so that they don't have these profiles built for them before they're even actually old enough to make that decision themselves.
So let's talk a little bit about what exactly is PII or person identifiable information, because a lot of people are probably wondering that.
FERPA has a definition of PII, which is the exact same definition that Ed Law 2D quotes in the law. It says, you know what, we want to use the FERPA ID for PII because that works and everyone's familiar with it. But one of the problems with saying that we're using the FERPA definition instead of just using the FERPA definition is it states that, well, FERPA has some exceptions. And that's one of the things that EdLaw 2D does not do. EdLaw 2D does not give exceptions. So I'm just going to go with what the FERPA definition is, and that is the student's name. And I'm going to read these right out so we're real clear. The student's name, the name of the student's parents or other family members, the address of the student or the student's family, a personal identifier as the student's social security number, a student ID number, or a biometric record, Mike. You know what a biometric record is?
Like fingerprint, something like that.
Fingerprint, an eye scan, like a retina scan, your face. So what we're talking about is how we have all these kids coming in and they're coming through the front door with cameras, right? We need to make sure that our cameras are protected because that would be considered PII. Then we have other indirect identifiers such as the date of birth, the place of birth, the mother's maiden name. So you take that information and alone or in combination is able to be linked to a specific student that would allow a reasonable person in the school community who doesn't have personal knowledge of that student to identify the student with reasonable certainty. And what else we have here? The information requested by a person who the educational agency or institution reasonably believes knows the identity of the student to whom the education record relates. That's a lot, right? The bottom line is you know what your PII is. Your names, your parents' names, your addresses. I kind of look at it this way. I have a lot of teachers say, yeah, but wait a minute. If we're protecting PII, that's going to limit me in what some of the things I do. You know what? You could be right. And we'll talk about that at a later date.
So it's really important to think about this and to also think about it in the context of students with disabilities too, because there's a whole nother layer of
Yes,
confidentiality associated with that.
absolutely. There's the IDEA, there's HIPAA.
So it's important to make sure that you work with the folks in your district to make sure that you're absolutely clear on what can be shared and what can't. And like Monica said, there are carve outs in FERPA and HIPAA and things like that, but those don't apply in EdLaw 2D. So EdLaw, our law in this state is stricter in a lot of cases when it comes to personal identifiable information than the federal laws are. So it's really important, especially when you have, you know, now with a lot of folks participating in their education via video conferencing, it's really important those systems are secure.
So I'm glad that you said that, Mike. It's almost like we planned this. I wanted to talk about, I just watched a video yesterday. Remember I said at the beginning that FERPA hasn't been updated since 2011. I think I did. If I didn't, I should have. So FERPA is what we've always been using for privacy, but it's kind of outdated. They have not updated anything. You know, when they wrote it, we didn't even imagine that we were going to be teaching our kids through the computer. Even before COVID came along, they still hadn't come up with distance learning. We do a lot of distance learning teaching, but yet FERPA hadn't been updated to accommodate that. Accommodate that. And now, unfortunately, we have COVID-19, and it kind of forced FERPA's hand. They received a lot of questions from around the country saying, I'm teaching at home and I don't know what to do about these PII scenarios. So they did a webinar and I watched it the other day and there was a PowerPoint out about it. So I just gleaned some things that I thought based off of the frequently asked questions that I thought maybe our teachers would like to know. Um, First of all, you can have PII at home. So some people were like, oh, I don't even want to take anything home. It's okay. You can take PII home because you're the teacher. You have access to that PII and your home is where you're teaching from now. So if you've been wondering whether or not it's okay for you to have that stuff at home, you're fine. You can. The other suggestion that FERPA had made was only use what your district's already approved for use. Don't try to reinvent the wheel just because you're at home. Stop, take a breath, and say, well, if I was at school, what software would I be using? And that's what you should be using. And if for some reason you can't access it, or you're teaching something with software that you haven't used yet, but you need to use, then need to follow what your district's process is for getting that software. Um, I've seen, I belong to a couple of Facebook teaching sites, and I've seen so many people saying, oh, yeah, I've used this. Oh, yeah, I've used that. It's great. You can't do that. You have to follow what your district has approved for you to use. Um, Another thing that's come up is observation. Who knows how long we're going to be here? And, can my class be observed if I'm teaching on recording? There's a couple of ways that you can do that. Yes, as long as your class isn't containing PII, and how often does your video teaching contain PII? But you have to be careful if somebody is going to observe your class that you're not doing that. And you also can't keep a recording of your class for any length of time. So can you record your class? Yes, if it doesn't contain PII. And B, if you don't plan on keeping it for any length of time. You just want to keep it because one of your students couldn't make it, but they are going to come in at 4 o'clock and you're going to show it to them then. So yeah, you can record your classes, but not for any length of time because then it becomes a matter of the child's education record. The last thing that I wanted to mention is parent-teacher conferences. Some of them might be scheduled and they're coming up. And what am I going to do? Can I still do them? Yeah, you can. You absolutely can. Some might be, you know what, I'm just having a student who's not giving me what I need, and I need to have a parent-teacher conference. So there are a couple of things that you have to keep in mind before you do them. Yes, you can, but first of all, if you are able to, move away from your spouse, other family members. Go in a separate room and do your conference. The second option is don't talk about PII. So don't talk about the fact that the student's attendance hasn't been really good. That would be considered PII because you're going to be talking about the child and you're going to be talking about his attendance. That's PII. Thirdly, if there's no way around it because you live in a one bedroom or whatever, your husband's there, he can't move, and you have to talk about PII, get the parents' permission. Just tell them, be honest. Say, look, I really want to talk to you. Is it okay? My husband's got his headphones on, but get the parents'
No.
permission. It is possible to still protect student data and still be under this COVID-19 restrictions that we're dealing with.
And that was probably enough to digest for now. So in our next segment, we're going to talk more about how it applies specifically to teachers and sort of what you have to be thinking about more at the classroom level. So we appreciate your attention, and you can look for the next ones shortly.
That's right. Thank you.